spent the last 10 years volunteering at the fort in Dover. And then suddenly 7 years ago, I discovered something that I couldn't explain. I found a whole series of names on the walls of the fort. All dated to 1942 and all from soldiers from different regiments. This was very strange because the fort was supposed to have been disused and abandoned at that point. I've no idea why they were here.
The sand was strewn with wreckage of all sorts, and we kept having an occasional shell dropping on the beach, each one taking its toll of wounded.
The enemy had driven the British and French armies to the beaches at Dunkirk. Deep beneath Dover Castle, a plan was hatched to bring the stranded soldiers back to England.
At last we reach the end of the jetty and find the destroyer waiting us. We are asleep as soon as we sit or lay down. Next thing we knew, there was a voice from above. We are here. There's Dover.
France surrendered to Germany. Hitler now set his sights on conquering Britain.
We are told, sir, that Herr Hitler has a plan for invading the British Isles. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be.
Britain was alone and under siege. The country had suffered heavy losses at Dunkirk. They now needed a way to fight back. One night, on the way home from the War Office at Whitehall, Dudley Clark, an assistant to the head of the army, had a game-changing idea.
He started thinking about when in the past armies had been beaten and driven from the field, what had other nations done to get themselves back into a war.
Dudley's bright idea was unusual, but desperate times called for desperate measures. He remembered hearing stories of the rough and ready cowboy types in the Boer War, who caused havoc for the British forces. They were called Commandos.
Here is a group of men who are fighting to defend their homeland. He could see that this could be an inspiration to hit back at the Germans. He wanted to see whether it would work under a new flag.
The British Army Commandos were born, inspired by the warriors of old. Churchill explained that their role was to carry out a reign of terror, raiding the coast of Europe in daredevil missions, taking the enemy by surprise. The Drop Redoubt was built to protect the country when the threat of Napoleon loomed large. But by World War II, it had been classified as disused. Etched onto the wall of the fort were 7 names. Hours of diligent research by Phil Eden, a historian and volunteer at the fort, revealed that 5 out of the 7 belonged to men from the No. 4 Commando Unit.
I realised that I had commandos in the fort, and I was quite gobsmacked when I found that out.
The Drop Redoubt was not a place associated with the history of the Commandos, so Phil felt compelled to take his investigation further.
If these were commandos, what on earth were they doing in an abandoned fort in Dover?
They asked for volunteers for the Commandos, and 30 of us volunteered from the company. Well, out of the 30, they took only 6 of us.
The success of the Commandos would rely heavily on the pursuit of a very un-British way of fighting. Skills more associated with guerrilla warfare needed to be honed. The Commandos needed a training ground, somewhere rough, tough, somewhere wild. A landscape that would become part of Commando history.
If you can cope with the landscape here, if you can climb mountains, if you can run up and down hills, if you can live off the land here, you can do that just about anywhere in the world.
Vast swathes of the highlands were sealed off, and grand houses seized and turned into commando schools.
Mrs. Cameron Head, who received a telegram whilst in London saying that her house at Inverailet was being requisitioned by the army. She found that half the furniture had been moved out of the house, that she wasn't allowed access to the house. And that was it, the fait accompli. It was all for the war effort.
Instructors were drafted in with a wide range of specialisms, such as demolition, weapons training, and survival skills.
We got in a whaler, we rowed out, there's a big sergeant there with all our equipment on, and he said, right, over the side, swim ashore. Well, a lot didn't get out of the boat, so I realised he meant it, and I got in the water and swam. And those who didn't swim was on the next train back to the units.
Two of the instructors, William Fairburn and Eric Sykes, cut their teeth as policemen on the mean streets and opium dens of Shanghai. They were masters of unarmed combat, a style they referred to as gutter fighting.
The strangle, the matchbox attack, thumb holds, hair holds, bear hugs. There are no rules, kill or be killed.
In Dover, Phil's detective work steps up a gear as he posts pictures of the graffiti online.
Well, as the history books weren't going to help me, I thought I would try and contact the families of the graffiti artists, because hopefully they might be able to tell me what happened. They might have passed down stories within their families that would explain exactly what they were doing in Dover.
A few months later, Phil was contacted by the daughter of one of the commandos who'd left his name on the wall of the fort. Richard Mann volunteered for the Commandos from the Royal Berkshire Regiment. He became a top sniper and a military medal winner.
I actually am extremely proud of his contribution to the war, because I know he was incredibly brave, and I know he looked after people around him too.
Hello, Carol. It's Phil Eden calling you from Dover.
But Carol isn't the only person with an interest in her father's story.
Good. Well, yes, indeed. The reason I'm ringing you is we've made an amazing discovery. We've found something relating to your father.
Oh my God, tell me, please.
My name's Adrian Howe. I'm an ex-Army Commando with 59 Commando Royal Engineers. I'm a current airborne reservist with 299 Para Squadron Royal Engineers.
Adrian is also a collector of historic Commando memorabilia, and today is showing Carol his most prized possession.
I think it's really important to remember what our forefathers did and sacrifices they made during the darkest hours of World War II.
Whilst in Scotland, Fairburn and Sykes developed plans for the deadly fighting knife, adept at silent killing. So effective, the Commandos made it their symbol.
We've got the Union Jack. Oh my goodness.
For the very first time, Carol is seeing her father's commando dagger, also known as the Fairburn-Sykes fighting knife.
I feel as though I've got Dad with me, which may be a very strange thing to say, but that's exactly how it feels. It was part of him.
Richard's knife has been personalised and even bears traces of skills he picked up from his peacetime job.
It's been so beautifully sharpened, professionally sharpened, and that stems from Dickie Mann's past occupation as a butcher.
Good men do go to war. They go to war because they have a conscience about it. They don't go because they delight in killing. They go because they feel an obligation. You could say good men go to war on all sides. And I'm sure that is the case.
"100 miles inside the Arctic Circle, off the coast of northern Norway, sat a German-occupied archipelago.
What could we do? It was very many Germans, and the system was very cruel. The Nazi system was very, very cruel system if you did something against them.
In the early hours of the 4th of March 1941, the Lofoten Islands would become the scene of Operation Claymore. Working alongside just 52 Norwegian soldiers, this would be the first real test for the British Army Commandos.
I always remember it was bitterly cold. When you were on duty on the bow of the ship, if the spray came on, it used to freeze on you, and you had all your lips and all around your side of your face were all frozen icicles.
The Germans prized Norway's wealth of natural resources. This included fish liver oil, a raw ingredient used in the production of high explosives.
The whole object of the exercise was to destroy these fish oil tanks and to demoralise the Germans. And build up the hopes of the Norwegians.
The raid on the fish oil factories was carried out in a matter of hours and took the enemy completely by surprise.
We were rather stunned with the whole thing, and it was as far as they were concerned, it was a dead loss. There's nothing they could do about it. We just had them with the pants down.
And one of the cheekier commando officers went to the post office and sent a telegram to Hitler saying, "Where are your troops?"
Well, where are they? Here they are, blindfolded.
The Commandos took over 200 Germans and collaborators prisoner that day. They also supplied safe passage for 300 young Norwegians eager to fight back against the enemy. On shore, there was a sense of euphoria amongst those left behind.
In the beginning, it was fantastic, you know, everybody was cheering hooray, you know, and even boats were sunk here and there, and things were blown up and burning. They have the flags, it was hooray, hooray, you know. They thought the war was over.
When top-ranking Nazi officers heard what had happened, they flew to the Lofoten Islands. Houses belonging to the parents of those Norwegians who'd left with the Commandos were then burnt to the ground. The Commandos had shown just what they could do, infuriating Hitler and becoming his sworn enemy.
Hitler was rather angry, and because of this friendly reception these English forces had got, so that should never happen again, so they built bunkers day and night.
They'd warned the Germans that they couldn't assume that the British weren't going to strike back, and ultimately that would lead to something like 250,000 German troops being tied up in Norway for the rest of the war, guarding the coastline.
At the drop redoubt in Dover, Phil now knew that 5 of the names belonged to Commandos. But who were the other 2? Phil believes he can solve the mystery if he can just put in place this final piece of the puzzle.
Now, graffiti of 2 of the men in the fort, 2 privates, George Ackerley and William Springer, both had Canada written underneath them. This intrigued me. I thought, well, what were Canadians doing at the fort?
This led Phil to the Canadian archives and a declassified document explaining that No. 4 Commando, along with Canadians from the Carlton and York Regiment, worked together on a top-secret mission in 1942.
The Canadians were there on a raid with British commandos to go and raid a beach near Boulogne. They called it Operation Abercrombie.
Boulogne was a heavily fortified area of Hitler's Atlantic Wall. The Commandos and the Canadians would land just south of the town at Hardelo in the dead of night. There, as part of Operation Abercrombie, they would take German officers prisoner and inflict maximum damage and destruction.
What I find when doing my research was how little there was known about Abercrombie. I've got lots of books on the Commandos. It's hardly mentioned in any of them. It's just pretty much lost. It's almost been airbrushed from the Commandos' history. What on earth had happened for it to be so forgotten?
At the outbreak of war, Tom Overbury left his job as a brewer's clerk to join the Royal Warwickshire Regiment before volunteering for the Commandos. After his death, his daughter Marianne discovered an old D-Mob suitcase hidden in the cupboard. In it were mementos from her father's war, his green beret, trophies from German officers taken on the Lofoten Islands. But the most spectacular find were his personal diaries.
He was very naughty. They were not supposed to keep them because it was bad security.
Marianne decided to transcribe the diaries.
It gives me an insight into part of my father's life that I really knew very little about. It was like him talking to me again, and I was just reminded of how lovely he was.
Amongst their pages are tales from momentous points in history, including the evacuation of Dunkirk, but not everything in the diaries was as well known. There were some entries that had Marianne baffled.
I found my dad had written 4 accounts, and 2 of them meant nothing to me because I didn't recognise the dates, I didn't recognise what he was talking about. But when I heard that via a friend that Phil was doing some research into a raid around the same time, I thought, hang on a minute.
Copies of Tom's diaries were sent to Phil, who confirmed that one of them contained a blow-by-blow account of the Lost Commando Raid, Operation Abercrombie.
So this is my dad and 4 Commando moving from the Prince Albert, the ship, to the drop redoubt in Dover, in readiness to do the raid from there. So getting very close now and very exciting.
18th of April 1942. Went through Hastings at about 7 o'clock. It had the appearance of one of those towns we saw in Belgium. Although a Saturday evening, it was practically deserted and many windows were boarded up and houses damaged. We eventually reached Dover at about 11:30 p.m. and finished up in a kind of partially ruined castle overlooking the harbour.
Dover was in sight and sound of enemy-occupied France. It became known as Britain's frontline town and Hellfire Corner. But no words can sum up the devastation incurred during World War II. The Commandos and the Canadians were kept under lock and key at the Drop Redoubt, which sat high on the cliffs above the town. Here they would wait for the perfect weather conditions to then be sent across the channel to carry out the raid. As they waited, they practiced their training, rehearsed their mission, but also found time to leave their names on the walls, in case they never returned. Barbara Springer is from Nova Scotia, Canada, and has made the 3,000-mile trip to Dover to see her uncle's graffiti.
I got an email. It started, "This is not spam," and it was Phil asking me if I would be, by chance, any relation to William Ephraim Springer. And I said, "Well, yes, I am. He's my uncle." And then he told me what was going on. He found his name.
Barbara had seen images of the graffiti online, but wanted to experience this unique part of her family's history in person.
Oh, I see you. I don't know. I see you. I see you. I see my Uncle Willie. I can't believe I'm here where he was at. And did that. So people would know he was here. Here we are telling people. So it wasn't in vain then. And I'm thankful about that.
Barbara can't quite believe her uncle and the other 59 men from his regiment worked alongside the Commandos. She believes that he was just one of many young Canadians who risked everything to fight in a war so far from home.
I think we were very fortunate that we had lots of young men like him, and they left their families and didn't know what was going to happen next.
The Canadians were specifically chosen for this mission. They had not yet taken part in a major operation. It was hoped that if they could gain a victory alongside the Commandos, it would be a great morale boost both here and abroad.
There's no way I could not come because it means something, and it's part of who I am. It's in my blood.
After 3 nights in the fort, a call went out from the tunnels beneath Dover Castle to now proceed with Operation Abercrombie. Lord Lovett, leader of No. 4 Commando, briefed those involved on what to do when they landed at Hardelow. The Navy were charged with taking the Commandos and Canadians across the Channel. In the dead of night, 2 miles from the French coast, the cohort boarded smaller landing crafts, dispersing in different directions.
We touched down at about 1:40 a.m. and found water up to our knees. But as we went shoreward, we had to cross the channel and the sea came up to our armpits. We had to wade 200 yards through the sea and cover about the same distance as sand before reaching the dunes.
At 2:20 a.m., the Commandos heard German voices in the darkness. They waited for them to come closer, and when they did, opened fire. The enemy soldiers returned fire for 5 minutes, until the Commandos stormed their position. But when they got there, they found the Germans had already fled for safety. Meanwhile, at sea, the Navy hadn't been so lucky. A German coastal patrol had happened across them, and an all-out gun battle ensued. Time was of the essence. The Commandos would soon be discovered. Their captain, Gordon Webb, led a small team up the beach to a searchlight. They began to prep their explosives.
And we're just going to attack when the SOS signal went up, so we had to just forget it and get back to the beach.
Lord Lovett feared the battle out at sea was taking a turn for the worse, so a star shell was fired into the air to recall his commandos.
But of course, when we got to the beach, it was so dark, I didn't know whether to turn right or left. We couldn't see anything. So we tossed a coin, turned right, and I said, if we made a mistake, I'll see you in Spain.
The men waded back through the sea, back to their landing crafts, and escaped under the cover of a smokescreen. Due to navigational errors, the Canadians had ended up lost in the channel. They had never even managed to land. The mission was a failure.
They did not knock out the searchlight. They did not capture anybody. It wasn't a success. The Navy lost 5 men in the operation. The raid has been pretty much buried in history. We don't really talk about our failures. We talk about the successes, but the raids that did not achieve their objectives have been swept aside to some extent.
The worst part of this job was the return journey. We were all wet through and it was cold.
One of the commandos had sneaked a water bottle full of rum onto the mission. He passed it round, giving his friends a chance to drown their sorrows. But when they returned to Dover, they were in for a big surprise.
And these are the men as they return from making Hitler nervous.
Reporters and camera crews were waiting at the docks, ready to spread the news of a stunning victory.
Another job well done by the commander.
The ink on the story of Abercrombie was dry even before they'd left for the French coast. The exaggerated stories travelled far and wide, with radio reports on Abercrombie even reaching Moscow.
It was a fiasco. I mean, the least said about it, the better, as far as I'm concerned.
At the fort in Dover, Phil has gathered the families of the Commandos and the Canadians together for a special screening of the newsreels. The Commandos were a symbol of hope, a flame in the dark. The raid had been used as propaganda. The public needed to know the war could be won, and that something was being done to win it. Newspapers even found an unlikely hero in policeman turned commando Jock Ennis.
They were all supposed to be wearing plimsolls or gym shoes for stealth, but my father somehow had forgotten his, and the only thing he had to wear on his feet at the last minute was a pair of carpet slippers. A press photographer happened to notice him wearing these carpet slippers and asked him why. And he said, well, I like to be comfortable when I go and fight the Germans, and he was immediately christened Slippers Ennis. This is a cartoon that was in the News of the World, and it shows very bemused-looking Hitler and Goebbels, and one saying to the other, well, who do you think left it there, Cinderella?
I think the Commandos were to an extent burdened, not least by propaganda, with this image of being, you know, superhuman soldiers who could achieve anything. People don't want their heroes to have feet of clay, but things did go wrong.
But there is no dispute that Operation Abercrombie taught valuable lessons for future missions.
Whether it's success or a failure is still part of history, and therefore it deserves space and time. There's a saying that goes, you die twice. Once when you stop breathing, or once when somebody speaks your name for the last time. I just hope that I've managed to keep the story of these brave men alive a little longer.